Imagine that you're a PMC, a private military contractor. Like a Wagner Group or Blackwater kind of person. Sorry, not Blackwater. What have they rebranded to these days? Academy? Constellus? Whatever. Regardless, you're the kind of person that would neutralize whoever sits in your crosshairs, man, woman, or child, so long as the price is right. There's a coldness to being that kind of contractor. To reduce a person to a number, not just the kind of number found in a casualty report, but one that affects the weight of your pockets, how full they feel. To a contractor like yourself, people exist only to serve your interests, and if they don't, they're discarded. You might find that cool, maybe even sexy. But now imagine everyone else around you just like this, treating you in the same way. Your neighbor, your grocer, your family, your boss, your leader. That's the reality presented in Quasimorph. This game is a brutal extraction roguelike, not the bullet hell action type that pretends to be a roguelike, the more classic, punishing, strategic turn-based one where the simple act of opening a door can lead to complete and utter devastation. The game has numerous narrative influences, among which is Event Horizon. In the film, a certain otherworldly technology opens up a pathway to another more hellish dimension, one where demons don't manifest physically, but rather changes people from the inside, corrupts them. And then there's Alien, which most of us know and love, where people can become incubators for something violent and unknowable and uncontrollable. The film also brings up horrors created by corporate overlords, that the people aboard the ship are merely numbers existing for the company's gain. There are also philosophical influences that permeate the game, such as from Nikolai Berdyaev. His core philosophies revolve around the idea that freedom is a core trait in humanity, and that everything else comes out of that core. It is inalienable. Then there's Danil Andreev, whose seminal work Rose of the World is directly referenced in the game a number of times. Although it's easy to look at it as simply the basis for quasimorphs and their cosmology, the book itself is about the interrelation of humanity to everything else, and the game explores these links between the physical and non-physical worlds in much the same way. Doom and Doom RL also come up among the developers' inspirations as well, which on first glance seems abhorrently lacking in substantial meaning. I mean, it's just a guy shooting demons from hell by the thousands, right? But there is something there to glean. In the original Doom, the main character is a distinctly disobedient soldier who can wipe out hordes of demonic creatures all under the guise of saving humanity. It gives this image of a strong, independent man unchained by rules, using bloody violence to solve humanity's problems. You should know this isn't a positive image. Or rather, this image is a recurring theme in certain modes of thought. All of these influences form together, congeal into this mass of code and pixels called Quasimorph, and it's trying to tell us something. In the beginning, I mentioned that you play as a PMC in this game. Except you're not the operator, you're the CEO in charge of operators. You see, you have an infinite amount of them. They aren't individuals per se, they're clones based on specific skill sets and traits and modes of thought. They're designed to further your goals. When one breaks, you simply get yourself a new one. Basically, they're no different from a hammer or a rifle. They're numbers that help you fill your pockets. Similarly, every corporation sees every PMC as just another number, a tool to be used and discarded upon breaking. This is particularly true for the Hexarchy, the ruling neoliberal hypercorporations that practically own everything. They aren't just the best corporations in their industry, they are the industry. There are no alternatives, no competition, it's their product or nothing. Among the most powerful is Andreev Company, more commonly referred to as ANCOM. It's the hypercorporation that practically owns all entertainment. Imagine Disney and Warner Brothers, every YouTuber and TV station, every radio show and podcaster, every movie, every song, every game, all of it's owned by, made by, and vetted by a single corporation. Interestingly, one of the most enduring pieces of entertainment revolves around Conan the Barbarian. You don't need much of an introduction. He's an individualistic strongman that destroys hordes of his enemies without batting an eye, all for the sake of his kingdom. Sound a bit familiar, yeah? Another Hexarch is Dilthy Corporation, which is listed in-game as engineering-focused. Basically, they research, develop, and offer spacefaring vessels, stations, methods of travel, and so on. In essence, they control space, the traversal, the occupation, and the mastery of it. As a galaxy-spanning species, it's clear that Dilthy's technology is required for humanity to survive in the first place. Imagine companies such as SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, and Origin Blue all in one insufferable package, and that's basically Dilthy. Up next is RealWare Corporation, which is a weapons systems designer and manufacturer. Think of companies that are part of the military-industrial complex. Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Sig Sauer, Kalashnikov Group, Now imagine that they merge together and attack the United Nations, not just eradicating its members, but also occupying it. Well, that basically happened in the game. RealWare essentially destroyed Geneva in the heart of galactic politics. This act ushered in their installment as part of the Hexarchy, the new ruling class. Last but not least is the Solar Broadcast Network, or better known as SBN. They're a corporation that represents new media, and their real-life analogs are easy to imagine. News Corp, Washington Post, Russia Today, and so on. Lump all of them into one and you've got SBN, but worse. They own all the information, how it's filtered, presented, and even absorbed. How could you possibly trust any information given to you if there's only one narrative line about it? Truth is, you can't. I've mentioned the Hexarchy a couple of times now. They're a collection of the 6 most powerful hypercorporations in the solar system, 2 of which have yet to be released. But together they had been instrumental in the destruction of the former galactic governments and have installed themselves in place of that power vacuum. It's an event which they refer to as the Great Anarchist Revolution. Now, any self-respecting anarchist should see that and go, I'm sorry, what? You see, all anarchists hate capitalism and corporatism. You can't be an anarchist and also be a corporation. In fact, nothing about the revolution has anything to do with anarchy. Rather, it's much more the opposite. I mentioned neoliberalism in the title, and for those who aren't aware of what it is, let's get into it now. It's a mode of economic thought. We don't really need to get into its history. All we need to know is that it's centered on privatization and deregulation. According to their ideology, corporations that are unrestrained by rules and regulations can better humanity because they can affect markets freely and with impunity. Does this sound familiar? The biggest problem with it is that it's an illusion. Unregulated markets lead to starvation and gross economic inequality. In other words, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. You want proof? Just look around. We're surrounded by self-proclaimed strong, brilliant men who can eliminate all your enemies and make your lives better than before. Now imagine all that tuned up exponentially and you get the Hexarchy. These hyper-corporations are the face of neoliberal fascism. And they have co-opted the term anarchy, similar to how particular totalitarian governments have co-opted the term democracy, or how fascists have co-opted ancient symbols that used to represent harmony, prosperity, or even divinity. Thankfully, there are enemies of the Hexarchy, and of corporatism in general. To be fair, however, and in my opinion, there are no heroes in this game, no protagonists to identify with. First among these enemies are basically pirates and criminals. For analogs in fiction, think of Robin Hood or Tank Girl. These so-called criminals and pirates are out there in the galaxy, doing their own thing, heedless of actual rules set by the corporate overlords. As in, they're actual anarchists. Except most have banded together via an organization called the Unchained Belt. But the UB isn't some kind of pirate lord situation, ruling with an iron fist and forcing their desires in various fleets. They're more of an organizing body, one that supplies, informs, and coordinates divergent anarchist groups, most of whom abide by a widely agreed upon code of conduct based on their common enemy, the Hexarchy. You might call them something of a union fighting against the boss man. Then there's the Civil Resistance, which is listed as a terrorist organization in the game. It's honestly less anarchic than the Unchained Belt, and they're more like militant remnants of the old government. All they're doing is futilely attempting a counter-revolution. The Hexarchy is very quick to paint them as unfeeling drones, whose programming overrides their humanity so they can fight with pure fervor and without emotion. But that sounds rather outlandish, doesn't it? Perhaps even dehumanizing? That's because dehumanization is a hallmark of fascist thinking and propaganda. That said, let's take a look at some real-world terrorist organizations and how they actually operate. Al-Qaeda, for example, doesn't brainwash people or apply complex psychological techniques on them. They simply offer malcontents who are disillusioned by the system a means to fight against it. They give them an AK, some training, and a purpose, then point them at their enemy. The more they fight and die, the more vehement they become in their beliefs. All this is true for every terrorist organization, by the way. Patriot Front, Aryan Nations, the Islamic State, Hezbollah. Most of them operate in pretty much the same way. So are the Civil Resistance brainwashing their people with technology and drugs? No. That's corporate propaganda. And actually, those methods remind me more of Sunlight Coven, the corporation that uses brainwashing technology and drugs to sell religious euphoria. Now we get to the Quasimorph Factions, which are a bit more complicated than the human factions. Quasimorphs exist in a separate plane, a separate dimension, like a metaphysical one on top of the physical, similar to what's illustrated in Rose of the World. In the game, every planet in the solar system has its own parallel dimension equivalent. They're called Brahmfataras, and their inhabitants are the titular Quasimorphs. Each of these Brahmfataras are relatively unique, with their own personalities, philosophies, beliefs, and even style. The Hexarchy is quick to depict them as violent demonic beings created by the Civil Resistance, and downplay the danger that they pose. Of course, the truth is that humans are equally violent beings, and also that these Quasimorphs have transcended their dimension by way of corporate tampering. The first of the Quasimorph factions is Tezcatlan from the Venusian Brahmfatara. It's led by Tezcatlan, a totalitarian warlord out to conquer everything he sees. His armies invade our reality by incubating the dead and violently burst into action fully armed and armored. Their only goal is the domination and subjugation of both physical and non-physical reality. You can consider them ideologically aligned with the Hexarchy, in that they want full control of everyone and everything. Or if you prefer, you can dub them as competitors of the highest order, and the Hexarchy is likely deathly afraid of them. Tezcatlan is opposed by other Quasimorphs, notably the Feathered Masks, who are also out of the Venus Brahmfatara. Technically, Tezcatlan disappeared thousands of years ago, which left the Feathered Masks as the de facto rulers of their space, and they do not like his reappearance, nor this declaration of domination over everything. In other words, they're fighting against their own reborn ancient leader to retain independence, and we can see that the Feathered Masks are more ideologically aligned with the civil resistance. Finally, there's Sheddu's Thousands, who are soldiers of realware that have been corrupted by the Brahmfatara on Mars. This is more of an internal transformation, a la Event Horizon. Essentially, their ideology has switched from a war-for-profit mindset to something more of a war-for-war mindset. They don't want conquest or freedom or the spoils of it all. They just want the sheer pleasure of battle. They're perhaps most analogous to Warhammer 40k's Chaos Space Marines, specifically the World Eaters. But don't confuse this faction as representative of any form of anarchy. They are slaves to their ideal of kill or be killed. So what does all this mean? Is there anyone we can root for? Anyone to join? Anyone to fight for? Well, you've got the corporations whose power and influence essentially controls humanity. The only ones resisting their might are a disparate fleet of barely organized anarchists and a militaristic arm of a long-dead democracy. In this game, there are no winners with choosing any side. Opting to further the Hexarchy only continues the cycle of individual meaninglessness, of a further reduction into numbers. And making the civil resistance win isn't really a great idea either. They're highly militarized and extremely ideologically motivated. Their ability for democratic thinking and leadership has long since eroded. It would be akin to the Taliban retaking control of Afghanistan. It's something that only the Taliban wants. Even the most morally acceptable faction, the Unchained Belt, isn't a good choice. They are held by their code, yes, but removing the Hexarchy would eventually turn them all against each other. Without a common enemy, it would descend into self-destructive chaos. You see, anarchism exists to challenge authoritarianism, and you can't have one without the other. Now, you could count the Quasimorphs as part of this equation, as a potential faction to fight alongside, but something about this rings hollow. Earlier I mentioned that Rose of the World informs us of Quasimorph cosmology, but it also serves as a means to interpret what Quasimorphs are. Narratively, they exist as a kind of mirror that reflects humanity's ideological desires by manifesting in the physical world. The act of becoming reveals the truer nature of humanity and what they want. It reveals the constant struggle between authoritarian control and individual freedom. So really, fighting for Tezcatlan or the Feathered Masks ultimately don't produce anything more meaningful than fighting for the Hexarchy or the civil resistance. And that leaves us with Sheddu's Thousand as the final option to fight for. We could bring utter devastation to humanity in a galaxy-spanning suicide. In this way, a new world can rise up from the ashes of the old, working towards an ancient Aztec apocalyptic prophecy where a sixth world can rise anew. And perhaps, that's truly the only way to rid humanity of its own dystopian future. Hope everyone enjoyed this essay. Thank you for watching, please sub for more, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.